When Pastor Kyle asked me to speak about this topic, I knew it was going to be a challenge. I could certainly say a lot about it from personal experience or my professional experience as a therapist. But this part about following Jesus through mental health challenges kind of forces me to think about it in a little bit of a different way, or a way that I'm not used to speaking about it. And that's because the challenge is how to locate Jesus in the context of mental illness, and then what it means to follow him through it. So this can't be a talk about just leveraging your faith to find personal relief when you're in distress. That can certainly be a part of it, but I think we'd be missing a lot if we limited it to just that. So following Jesus through mental health challenges has three parts. There's following Jesus through and mental health challenges. Now, the first calls for recognizing Jesus' presence and going in that direction. The third part, mental health challenges, refers to the context of mental illness and mental health challenges. I'll be using those terms kind of interchangeably. And a context that we find ourselves in as individuals or as communities. And that middle part, through, says something important about our relationship to mental health challenges itself. So I'll talk about mental health challenges first as a context. And rather than starting with a detached clinical explanation, I want to simulate it with kind of an experiential metaphor here. So right now I want everybody to take a second and just notice the saliva in their mouth. Okay, now swallow it. Probably fine, right? Nothing distressing about that. It's just, you're used to it sloshing around in there with your teeth. And you swallow it and they just produce more. You should have a cup underneath your chairs. And now we're going to do a drug test. Just kidding. No. So what I want you to do, if you're willing, is take that saliva and spit in the cup. Okay? Now, as you look at it, notice some of the things about it. The bubbles, maybe the coloration from the food that you just had. It's a little bit gross as it's adhering to the cup. All right? And if you're willing, I want you to drink it again. I'm noticing most of you aren't even doing it, okay? So here's the thing, though. What's the problem? It was just in your mouth. It's the same stuff. You're just experiencing it in a different context that feels disturbing, right? And that's in essence what mental illness is. Your thoughts, your feelings, your perceptions in themselves are completely harmless. But when you experience them in a mental illness context, they feel disturbing. They feel like things you need to distance yourself from and avoid, and it causes a lot of problems because you walk around with your mind wherever you go. Now, what about mental illness as a societal thing, as a cultural thing? Okay, so we live in an age of mental illness. We really do. Sociologists have noted how, with modernity, urbanization, mental illness increases in the population. And now in the information age, it's pretty clear that we're experiencing a new wave. And this is happening even with all of that technology being leveraged to try to reduce stigma, scale services. But it's hard not to shake this feeling that we're just kind of bailing water in a sinking ship here. And you really can't escape it, whoever you are. Even if you don't suffer from depression yourself, you've certainly filled in for a coworker who just couldn't overcome the heaviness in bed that day or even sustain the concentration to come to work. You may not have social anxiety yourself, but you may see it in your kid who struggles to make friends as they're consumed with what others might be thinking about them. You may not suffer from chronic worry yourself, but you may see it in your teen who spends so much time doom spiraling as their phone and the algorithms pick up what they're afraid of and selectively confirm it. You may not suffer from suicidality yourself, but everybody in this room has lost somebody to it or knows someone who has. You may not suffer from schizophrenia or psychosis yourself, but you see it every day on your commute to Oakland, maybe even walking down the middle of the street. You may not suffer from addiction yourself, but you probably have a friend who's become more and more distant as they turn to alcohol or drugs. And we all share spaces every day with people who have experiences that are too confusing to communicate or too shameful to speak. So where is Jesus in all this? So let's start with the passage. So the passage says that Jesus got out of the boat. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. What I think is really interesting about this is it doesn't say that Jesus sought him out, right? He just says Jesus showed up in his neighborhood. The man or his spirit, it's kind of unclear, recognized him and ran out to meet him. To me, kind of what this means is that Jesus drops in the middle of mental health challenges for us as individuals in a community, but we need to pay attention to recognize where he is. And what I think is implied here is that Jesus saw his Father's image in this man and that it needed to be set free, and that he needed to set him free because this man was meant to display his glory. And in attending to where Jesus might be in our midst, I believe it's in those contexts where individuals and communities demonstrate a certain kind of compassion. I think that's where Jesus is, the kind of compassion that shines a light on the unique and beautiful characteristics of people and communities, even when they're in the midst of mental illness. When this happens, you see these loaves and fishes miracles, right? Real life parables that teach us something about the kingdom of heaven. We could go for the next slide. Thank you. On the left is Dr. Dixon Chibanda. He's one of 18 psychiatrists in Zimbabwe, a country with over 16 million people. And on the right is Grandma Jack, conducting a therapy session for a woman suffering from depression. Now, to connect these two people together, we have to travel back to 2006 when Dr. Chibanda was heartbroken after losing a patient to suicide who simply couldn't afford the bus ticket to travel the distance to see him. He began to think how he and his colleagues could ever help to meet the need in their country for services given the short supply. It occurred to him that his country had this abundant supply of grandmothers, and that grandmothers were a trusted source of wisdom, and the community revered them and respected them. So he began training grandmothers to deliver evidence-based cognitive behavior therapy on open-air park benches for people. And in 2016, he published a study comparing a clinical trial, comparing regular care at a mental health clinic versus 6 sessions on the bench with the grandma. And these are measures of basically depression and anxiety. And you see the black dots there. That's what's become known as the friendship bench model, are the black ones. And if you're used to reading research, as I know some of you are, look at the daylight between those error bars, right? And that both of these groups were getting treatment, were getting good treatment. But the grandmas just blew them out of the water, okay? And to date, over 300,000 patients in Zimbabwe have received treatment from a grandmother using this model. It's been replicated all over the world, including the United States. Now that's something I see Jesus in. I see that as a loaves and fishes story. I want to highlight an example from my clinical practice in the condition I treat most frequently, and that's obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, a key feature of OCD is the experience of having unwanted, intrusive thoughts and images that are offensive and contrary to what your values are and what your personality is. So if you're a caring, gentle person with OCD, you might struggle with intrusive thoughts of being violent towards others. This was a case with a teen girl I worked with who struggled to be around her mom or even look at her mom because she would experience this intense thought of, what if I lost control and stabbed her? Now, when you're working in the space of fear and anxiety, the best way to, and kind of the only way to work with it, is to approach the fear directly. So our work together involved knives. We holding knives, I'd hold them, she'd hold them, kind of point them at me a little bit. And to have that experience over and over again of, look at this, I'm not stabbing anybody. I'd stand across the room and go, okay, whenever you're ready. Nothing? Okay, well, maybe I'm across the room. Let me sit next to you so I'm in your reach. You ready to do this? I mean, I guess it's over now. It's fun being your therapist. Nothing happens, right? So she's doing really well, but the fear isn't nearly as big with me as with her mom, because she cares much more about her mom. So I asked her, so are you up for doing this with your mom? She said, yeah. So I approached the mom in the waiting room, and I hadn't quite gotten around to explaining to mom this part of the treatment. And so I expected there'd be some kind of hesitation or discussion, but the minute I mentioned it, the mom jumps up and goes, yes, of course, we'll do it. Walks right past me into the kitchen where I was working with her daughter, snatches the knife, deftly hands it to her daughter, and says, okay, daughter, you will stab me now, go ahead, and turns her back. And this girl gets this devious grin on her face and goes like this. And for a second, I almost lunge at her to pull her back, but I hold back, and of course nothing happens. Now, the example here that I don't want you to take, this may not be worth saying, is that if a loved one suffers from mental illness, start giving them knives and challenging them to stab you. Please don't do that. But what I want to pay attention to is just the bold, active faith that the mom had in who she knew her daughter was, apart from the mental illness. That's where I see Jesus. And Jesus showed up for me in my mental health journey as well. In 2009, I was in Milwaukee working towards my PhD in clinical psychology. But it was ironically going to get cut short by my own mental health challenges. As my coping continued to deteriorate there, it became more and more clear that I couldn't stay in that program and get healthy. And this was a program that I was so psyched to be a part of. I'd worked so hard to get into, and I was doing well there. Was loving rubbing shoulders and collaborating with some of the most important people in the field who were interested in talking to me because of who I was working with, but I was not doing well. On a visit home, I was speaking to my dad and agonizing over this decision of whether to come home. And I told him, I don't know, if I move home, I'm so worried I won't be able to get out again. And without flinching or hesitating, he just said, well, I'm not. Since I've known you, you've always been someone determined to make it on your own. No, you'll come home, you'll stay here for a while, and I know you'll get back at it soon. And he spoke into something more elemental to who God created me to be than the illness I was experiencing, that he saw that I didn't. Over the next couple years, I did recover. Support from my parents, hometown friends, church community, and yes, a therapist that taught me what I think I needed the most, which was just to be kind to myself again. And, like that feeling of your leg going to sleep and the feeling slowly sort of percolating in there, I started to feel the blood rush back into my spirit. Yeah, there it is. So this is just a picture of me at around that time. This was actually Halloween. That's why I'm wearing a mullet wig. That's a wig, yeah. With a friend of mine, and we're cooking dogs for some kids in a tutoring program we were volunteering at. And I love that image because it represents to me a time where I was really starting to feel like myself again. So, during that time, my church that I hadn't been a part of for a while was like a second home to me, as was the coffee shop that they owned at the time. Got me playing guitar again, writing music, playing at open mics, and I eventually found a different angle of approach to my career in mental health, something I'd been determined to do since I was 19. And I've been fortunate to build an independent practice that I've maintained since 2018. And what my dad expressed as just an inevitability of the independent person God made me turned out to be exactly what happened, and at the same time, not at all what happened. My recovery happened not because of my independence, but because Jesus worked through the communities and individuals that poured love, attention, time, and resources into me. It was costly. Kind of like those 2,000 pigs in this story that ran off the cliff, almost as a symbol of the resources that could have gone into that man's care. According to the USDA, today a wholesale price for a pig is about $88 per 100 pounds. So hogs are typically raised to about upwards of 300. Take 2,000 of them, that's about a $500,000 loss in today's money. If you look at a time that Jesus' time, a time of scarcity, and in our time of abundance, I have to think in his time it was much, much more, exactly. What about those of us who find ourselves in the middle of our own private mental health challenges? What does it mean for us to follow Jesus when these things can be so persistent, so heavy, so downright disabling? This is where the through part comes to mind. There may not be an immediate way out, but you don't have to be stuck in. Instead, Jesus gives us a direction or a way to move through. This starts by recognizing who he's already claimed us to be. He's claimed and valued us. He's claimed and valued you. Like Jesus' stance of gentleness and patience towards you and your psychological pain, take that same compassionate stance towards yourself, and that's a Christ-like act. And with this stance, move in the direction of the full life he's given you, giving yourself patience and compassion each step of the way, and doing it within whatever capacity you have at that moment. Not more, not less. This could mean seeking help that's available to you. It could mean showing up socially. It could mean putting in a little time with a hobby. Even just eating. Any step in a life-affirming direction, however small, giving yourself compassion and patience each step of the way. But none of this is easy with mental illness on board. So this image is an artist's illustration of a scene in a book called Pilgrim's Progress. John Bunyan wrote this book in the 17th century about a character named Christian who journeys out of his hometown, the city of destruction, to the celestial city. And it's meant to be an allegory of a Christian's faith journey throughout their life. But many, including myself, believe it was influenced in a large part to the mental health challenges that he had at the time that today would likely be diagnosed as OCD. And so what you see happening here is that Christian finds himself at the entrance to the Palace Beautiful. The man in the doorway is the porter named Watchful. He's beckoning him to the open door. and assures Christian that if he sticks to the path, the lions are chained, they're not going to be able to reach him. When we take a step towards Christ, when we make any kind of movement in the context of mental illness, in ourselves, in others, those troubling thoughts and feelings are almost invariably going to get riled up as we move in that direction. They're going to try to get us to turn back or get caught in a futile tussle with them internally that diverts our attention from where we're trying to go. But they're chained lions and as harmless as the saliva in your mouth. And since Jesus covered them anyway, why not even make room for them and invite them along for the ride? I don't know if Jesus suffered from mental illness. It's not a sin to suffer from mental illness. He was without sin. He certainly had plenty of experiences that could have produced a whole spectrum of mental health challenges. He suffered from extreme mental and emotional anguish on his journey on earth and up to the cross. He was overwhelmed by the weight of responsibility for the human condition, abandoned by his friends and community when he needed them the most, humiliated, mocked, ultimately tortured and executed. But we read that for the joy set before him, endured the cross. And he rose again on the third day, and his scars are still there. And he says we'll be raised again as well. But that's not right now. And I believe that death and resurrection are happening daily on a smaller scale, and especially in the midst of mental health challenges. We just need to pay attention. And this, he's inviting us into his kingdom every day. Let's pray. Jesus, thank you for everybody in this room who showed up. Thank you for your presence. Thank you that you are here even in the midst of these challenging times, both in our minds and in our communities, in our culture. Help us to see where you are in that and remind us who you've claimed us to be despite all of that, and give us that little nudge to follow you one step at a time. Amen.